Hi YouTubers, Dave Soriano, and a brief presentation on some of the research I'm doing. I'm a chemistry professor with the University of Pittsburgh Bradford in Pennsylvania, USA, and I work in the area of chemistry of art, particularly paint formulations for artists. So let me call up my PowerPoint slides here and we can get underway with the presentation. Oil pastels, sticks, and cold wax. At the end of the presentation, I'll also have my contact information again. All right, what we see here are some of the materials I'm working with, and the materials, oil pastels, generally are manufactured to niche market as sticks, and they contain a pigment, mineral oil, and a drying oil. In the case of oil sticks, that would be conventional linseed oil or walnut oil. If you want an oil pastel, you leave out the drying oil. In other words, the surface after application will remain workable. We work in this area of the pastels, the sticks, as well as cold wax, where we're putting in a lot of time and effort now, and we use all kinds of goodies. I'm making this presentation to a general audience. There will be a little bit of technical stuff, chemical stuff. A chemist without knowledge of art is a bull in a china shop. An artist without knowledge of chemistry will always be insecure, and that's fully understandable. And chemistry actually had its origins, the chemical industry, with the production of paints and dyes, the Perkin condensation in the United Kingdom, late 1800s, the beginning of the chemical industry. So here we see materials I'm using. Triglycerides such as trilaurin as a candidate oil in the compositions, tributylin, trilaurin, triacetin. We also use kaolin family of clays. Interesting properties, as I'll mention as we go along. Pozzolana clay in the soil around Mount Vesuvius was used as a venerable component of Roman concrete, which civil engineers are still studying. And if I take kaolin clay and heat it up to a certain temperature for a certain amount of time, it will turn into a pozzolana. And I also have contacts in the mining industry out in the western United States, where I'm getting in some very interesting family members of the kaolin group, which are natural nanotubular materials. I'll have a separate presentation on the kaolin component. I also work with shortening, with coconut oil, with coconut so-called 92F. That means partially hydrogenated coconut oil, which would melt just about body temperature, of course, 98.6 Fahrenheit, 37 Celsius. So the partially hydrogenated coconut oil is basically put a little on the palm of your skin and it will melt. And Johnson & Johnson conventional paste wax, paraffin wax I use, lard, beef tallow, all these interesting materials, oils, waxes. We have a local refinery, and the American Refining Group, where we have a number of our graduates working. They're always very generous in their support of my work. They supply me with their mineral oil, one of the cuts from refining process of Pennsylvania crude. And I am able to obtain from them mineral oil for use in my work. And of course, by mineral oil, we mean derived from petroleum. And the Native Americans, such as the Seneca, first used petroleum as a laxative. And that's what you would find in a drugstore and the drug section of Walmart. You would find mineral oil. And I also use different types of mineral oils and vacuum pump oils in the work. If I'm working with the preparation of pastels, sticks, or cold wax, I would use the paraffin group mineral oil with pigment. If I'm using soy wax or castor wax, hydrogenated castor oil, which is a very hard wax, or carnauba. If I'm using vegetable waxes, such as used in candle making, then I will use jojoba oil. Now, jojoba oil is really a wax. It's a liquid wax, and we're making some synthetic analogs of the jojoba oil, which I'll mention in a little while. But these are some of the materials we work with every day. I also have venerable pigments, oil-based pigments, drying oil, linseed oil. I picked these up at a local Goodwill shop not too long ago for inexpensive price. On eBay, some of these are selling for $30, $40 a tube. So I have Naples yellow and cadmium, barium orange. But these materials, of course, often have very poisonous materials: lead, cadmium, selenium, arsenic, beautiful colors, but poisonous materials. And you know, many artists were poisoned in their work. That probably led to Caravaggio, the great Italian master, some of his mental illness. Van Gogh, Paul Gauguin, many others in contact with poisonous paint formulations. I use these in our forensic work at school. I'm an amateur artist. Let's just say a very much so and self-trained amateur. But I enjoy that for relaxation. And I'm going to be doing some simple paintings with these unpleasant but beautiful paints. And our students will use X-ray fluorescence in the chem department, and we'll be able to see if they can detect part per million levels of the heavy metals such as lead and cadmium. Forensic science is not only criminal work, but forensic art. Every major museum will have a program for restoration and also detection of counterfeits. If you feel that the museum's going to purchase a piece of work, it's made by a master, well, let's do some analysis of the paints there. And if you're finding synthetic paints from 1950, I don't think a master did it. And of course, retouching or restoring work is a very delicate art. There's a professor of chemistry at the University of Pisa in Italy who is doing restoration of some master's work, and he is using some modern materials, but there's no choice because of many of the paints fading due to sunlight, humidity, and even air pollution as it increases. The next slide shows you some of the other materials I use. Walnut drying oil, boiled linseed oil is conventional, and even from Walmart, a clear mineral oil. And there's jojoba oil on the right, a highly prized material, jojoba oil, which is, as I mentioned, actually a liquid wax. The next slide is showing beeswax, cocoa butter, which we have found in the preparation of our sticks, pastels, and cold wax. Cocoa butter, which melts in your mouth, not your hand, so to speak, used in chocolate manufacture, is a very interesting low melting around body temperature. Now, your soy wax, your castor wax, these are going to be melting far above paraffin wax body temperature. But when you're getting around cocoa butter or shortening or lard being triglycerides isolated from pig processing, beef tallow from bovine cow, we're interested in natural materials and their physical and properties and flow off brush, viscosity at room temperature, etc. We're also doing some chemistry, and I'll run through this very quickly. Anyone with a chemistry background can slow down and examine these reactions. We're working on hybrids. This is the chemistry part, where we're taking waxes, We're taking oils now, not paraffin. Paraffin is strictly hydrocarbon, alkane. Um, we're working with esters from vegetable oils or natural sources, and we do some transesterifications to make hybrids of waxes and oils, looking for the ones that would work well in a cold wax formulation. Now, the master Rembrandt spent a lot of time in developing cold waxes, which he used actually to prepare skin textures. And sometimes you will get the impasto at a thick three-dimensional surface. You can add a resin such as Dahmer resin to create a harder wax at room temperature. And of course, encaustic artists, going back to ancient Egyptians, Greeks, Romans, they were using hot wax, painting with hot wax, and the works of art can last and have for centuries if kept out of direct sunlight and avoid being in high temperature environments. And caustic wax is a highly specialized area of art form. So we're working with the development and utilization of cold waxes. And that would be a material, which I'll show you pictures of, which would be a solid at room temperature or a pasty solid. And that material is prepared from a part of pigment and a part of an oil, mineral oil or vegetable type oil, and another part of drying oil, linseed or walnut. And we'll show you that in a few seconds. But here's some of the chemistry we're doing where we mix and match waxes. Now, you can't just put them together. You might say, well, why don't you just take some wax and some vegetable oil? They may not be soluble in each other. They may not dissolve. Or if you heat it up, one will crystallize out faster than the other, and you'll get a layered cake. Now, there's a couple of papers in this area. There's an interesting patent by Tony Olenek. I know Tony, he's down in Georgia now. And when Tony was working in the industry, he had a patent for the Hansotech, incorporated in Woodbury, New York, patent number 5986119. The filing took place in 1997 on Christmas Eve, December 24th, and that's when the meter starts running when a patent is filed for it, not when it's issued. So this is an expired patent, and in there, Olenek describes the preparation of reconstituted castor oil and the chemical hybridization of oils using a tin 2 catalyst up around 200 degrees Celsius for 4 or 5 hours. There's another patent or two that's come out, and this is starting to generate a lot of interest in the cosmetic field. What Tony was doing was hybridizing oils, but he used some waxes too, but not too much, mostly strictly oils, modifying properties. And we're interested in the physical properties and, as I said, flow off the brush. Now, the next slide is a continuation. And there we see tributyrin as a triester, a triglyceride, a liquid at room temperature. And if you react it with soybean wax, just a general structure of a solid wax, hydrogenated soybean oil is candle material, soybean wax. Then we also use a promoter such as lauryl alcohol, a saturated C12 aliphatic primary alcohol. And with a tin 2 catalyst up around 200 for 4 or 5 hours, we're able to start to initiate mixing and matching, transesterification in this certain process. There are actually 3 types of transesterifications. The most common is reacting an ester with an alcohol, usually cheap methanol or ethanol, and that's called the Fischer esterification route. But here we're actually having one ester attack another, so you start to get hybrids. The next slide also shows you vegetable oils, lauryl alcohol, vegetable waxes, and then what we do is blend them upon cooling with certain amounts of pigment and mineral oil and or drying oil to yield the pastels or oil sticks, which we pour while warm, the whole gamish. We pour it right into penny, nickel, dime, and quarter rolls. We put a cork on the bottom and pour them right in there to make oil pastels or sticks. Recall what I said, that the stick will have a drying oil, the pastel will not. And if we're going to make a cold wax, we vary the ratio and then pour that, after cooling a few minutes, we pour the molten mass into plastic containers, which you'll see. Here's some swatches we're making. These are prepared from either oil sticks pastels, or we take some of the cold wax and blend it with oil-based commercial paints, or cheap tempera powders, or ground up sidewalk chalk, colored chalk with pigment, or molten crayons. We melt down crayons, yep, and then melt them down, remove the paper from the crayons. Crayola, Rose Art, Crazy Art, even Bob Evans restaurants had crayons, and I buy them wholesale, 5 or 10 pounds at a time, broken used crayons from on eBay, melt them down and pour them into silicone molds, and when cool, then I have bricks of crayon, which I can use as a cheap pigment source. If I want to tone or shade, change and make a positive chroma, I can always add a small amount of an expensive oil-based commercial paint and modify the color or blend colors. So those are swatches there. We use with cold wax and with the pastels and sticks, we tend to use bristle brushes. We find they work very, very well. Now, here are the cold waxes we're preparing, and I must say, chemically speaking, each one of these we prepare seems to be unique in terms of blending well, brushability, hard or soft at room temperature. And here we have some with, you can see in the lower left corner, using red crayon as pigment. The one behind that would be purple. And we have a green, and then we have some where no pigment has been added. It's simply a wax, mineral or vegetable, with mineral oil or jojoba oil, and blend that up. And then a drying oil, linseed or walnut. The next slide shows some additional ones. If I have a large quantity, then I use plastic pans, and while molten, pour it right in. You can see the blue one came out pretty uniform. The green one's got a little bit of yellow mixed in, and if I were to use that in painting, I work with Bristol paper, a hard cardstock, usually 11 by 9 inch, and unless you want the oil to seep through, I usually apply an acrylic gesso to the surface, and then you don't get oil seepage. Then I will take, for example, the blue or green there and break off some piece on a spatula, and I would put it on a palette and put maybe 1-to-1 wax with oil-based paint and blend and apply with bristle brush. If you're going to do a little bit better quality painting, then you would probably use the commercial paints with clear cold wax. But if you're going to do, if it's feasible, you can use the inexpensive crayons as a pigment source. And usually give it a day or two to dry, and then you can work the surface and put layers. If done well, cold wax art is very impressive and very creative. Now, here's some candles. I go to the local Goodwill shop, Salvation Army, thrift shops, and I'm always picking up candles at good prices. I melt them down, and I pour them right into silicone molds. And I even pick those up in the thrift shop. Silicone molds can be very, very expensive for baking. But I pick them up whenever I get them, and I don't care whether it's meant for cookies or cupcakes. I'm pouring in the molten crayons, In this case, these wouldn't be crayons. These are simply candles, colored candles that I've melted down and poured into molds to make smaller blocks as needed. In the right corner, upper right there, you see a white box. In there is, that's paraffin oil, generously donated by American Refining Group here in Bradford, Pennsylvania. That's paraffin wax, but what you're seeing there are the bulk of the red and the purple and the green. Those are soy wax that's been colored for candle use, and I melt them down. What we have here are crayons, so that would be paraffin wax. There's a company in Australia making crayons now from soy wax, but here we're looking at the materials used by Crayola, Rose Art, Crazy Art, the big crayon suppliers in the United States, and I melt them down, and you can see the trays, the blocks of crayon, and those are simply larger silicone molds that I pour the molten crayons in. I throw them right into cans, melt them down, and you can throw the cans away, and don't even remove the papers from the crayons. You can do that. There are YouTube videos. You can put them into warm water and peel them off. You can be very careful with an X-Acto knife, make a slit right down the length of the crayon, peel the paper off. I throw them right into disposable vegetable cans and or ceramic cups, heat them up on a heating tray, melt them down, and decant. And with tongs, I just pull the crayon papers out of there, and when they're cool, dispose of them. You can probably use them to start fires too. It'd be a good fire starter. Here we see some pigments. The purple one in the lower right corner is a cobalt phosphate. So we make some of the ones, we stay away from the arsenic, of course, and the cadmium and the lead, but that's a fairly benign cobalt. You can get blue or purple very easily from it. And some Azo Pigments. Now that's another video we're going to do later this summer. I'm generating Azo Pigments. Pigments are not soluble. Dyes are in water or solvent. And we're making Azo dyes, a very important class of dye, by a so-called grind method. We carry out the diazonium chemistry to make the Azo dyes at 0 to 5 degrees in 5 minutes with grinding, and we're able to make our pigments that way. And in some cases, when I'm doing acrylic, gouache, or watercolor, I will go with the Azo dyes, which are water soluble. And in that container there, that white container, is yellow ochre, earth pigments, yellow, red, black. So we use pigments from time to time and put them right into the molten wax and mineral oil, drying oil. Here's a nice assortment of crayons in a prior life, and now they're ready to be used in artwork. And I make a lot of these in the summer, so I have a big supply on hand. And so during the school year, I don't have a lot of time to be spending melting down crayons. And I sometimes like to see the students' faces when they see a chemistry professor working with crayons. When I was a kid, we couldn't afford the 64 crayon box, the 64. The rich kids had the Crayolas with 64. But now I've got more than anybody out there. This is soy wax. Soy wax uncolored. I buy it commercially in bulk. And or I buy colorless soy wax candles, melt them down into smaller portions for my research. And here are some oil sticks, oil pastels. I'd have to look at the catalog numbers to see which is which. The only difference is if you include linseed or walnut oil, then when you go to use the stick, you have to, with finger or a piece of paper towel, remove the surface that's exposed, because that probably has already dried. And then it exposes the material, and you basically have a combination of drawing and painting using the pastels or sticks. And you can see we pour the molten materials right into cardboard penny, dime, quarter, half, well, not half dollar, penny, dime, nickel, quarter rolls with cork bases, and it works very, very well. And then let it cool down, put it in a freezer overnight, and then you can see and evaluate whether you want to put more or less pigment and whether you want to include drying oil or not. And that's very easy to do. So pastels, sticks, and cold wax, very closely related. Here are the molds. These are ones I pick up locally. They can be very expensive because they're very good, and the cooled material pops right out. So I don't care what the motifs are. And that red one there, I got 2 of those for $2.99, brand new US dollars at the local thrift shop. And I know on eBay they would sell for probably $25. So keep your eye open for the silicone molds if you're going to melt wax. Here's a heat tray. I get those at Walmart, these heating trays. They're very inexpensive. I pay about $18 each here in Pennsylvania, USA at Walmart. And I even got one of these brand new in a box at the thrift shop for $5. And at school, we have a non-science course, Drugs and Society. There's a lab component. And what we do is a social mixer right at the end is a little bit of encaustic art. We take glass bottles, we apply a gesso surface, and then we have students melt crayons, and with animal hair brushes, don't use nylon brushes, they'll decompose very quickly in hot molten crayon. Then they can paint the bottles and do a simple encaustic type art and keep the bottle as a souvenir from the course. So here I'm melting down either in ceramic cups or in empty vegetable tins crayons that I will then pour in the silicone molds. Now, besides developing these and testing them out, and it's a very good undergraduate research for students, because if you're going to be studying chemistry, it's very important to have, while an undergraduate, hands-on laboratory experience. And paint is a venerable area of chemistry, as I told you early on. That's where the chemical industry started. And there are programs in the country now developing forensic art programs. The university, Buffalo State College up in Buffalo, New York, has a master's degree in forensic art. And it should be an integral and will be an integral component of Master's of Fine Arts programs in our country. Every museum has to have a forensics department. It's without question. There's a PhD organic chemist who is actually the chief of forensic art at the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York City. And this is really, in my estimation, the beginning of the age of design. We're entering a new era, and of course the Italians have always been right up there at the top in design, furniture, fashions, because they were turning out many, many talented architects. And how many jobs can they find in Italy as architects? So it's quite natural that many of them have gone into design, and they really truly lead the world in design. And I think we're in the first few years of the age of design, where left and right brain thinking, analytical thinking, and creative thinking are going to have to both be utilized. There are a few books written on that. Another thing I do, here's a brief picture of the Boston Museum of Fine Arts. They are the 5th largest museum in the United States, and they have a wonderful conservation and collections management department. I'm in contact with their director, and Harvard has the #1 paint and pigment collection in the world, I believe. The name escapes me, but if you go to Harvard's art museum, you would be able to find that they have a very impressive pigment and paint collection that can be used by forensic chemists that are trying to determine whether a paint was used by Van Gogh, and that can also be used in, of course, crime. To see if there's paint on a car or something. So Harvard has a massive collection of paints and pigments. Boston Museum of Fine Arts has the 2nd largest, and I have in the past already sent them novel formulations of paints that I've made for their collection, in case some artist out there is using my material 100 years from now. And I will be sending them some of my cold waxes. I will apply them to microscopic slides, allow them to dry, cover them with thin cover glass, and send them a catalog of what they are, how I made them, when I made them, so they will add it to their collection. And of course, upstairs there are Rembrandts, and there are my paints, but down in the basement somewhere. I hope you enjoyed this light presentation. Contact information: Dave Soriano, Associate Professor of Chemistry, Department of Chemistry, University of Pittsburgh, Bradford in Western Pennsylvania, USA. You have my email address, and if there's an artist out there watching this, if you want to collaborate with me, get a hold of me. I can send you some of my materials and you can test them out. If you need a little bit of help with the chemistry, I'll be more than glad to help you. I will be posting up very nice videos this summer. We'll have our technology coordinator here at school produce and direct the videos for instructional purposes, but hopefully this